We talk about investing all the time, but have you ever truly stopped to ask yourself, what is the ultimate purpose of investing? What does it actually mean to be a value investor? The knee jerk reaction for most people is to preserve and grow wealth. But that answer comes with a massive caveat. You have to first redefine what wealth actually means. In economics, real wealth isn't the number in your bank account, nor is it the brick and mortar under your name. Real wealth is your absolute purchasing power within the economy. Once you view wealth through this lens, you'll realize that many of the assets we take for granted are actually quietly eroding your net worth. Take the British aristocracy from 2 centuries ago. They were at the absolute apex of the social pyramid, inheriting vast estates and grand castles. But to maintain that lifestyle and status, they had to employ a small army of butlers, maids, and gardeners. The moment they opened their eyes each morning, they were facing a massive cash drain. These assets generated no sustainable cash inflows. Instead, they were just incredibly expensive consumer goods. Fast forward to today, and many of their descendants have been forced to liquidate those lands and castles just to get by. The lesson here: heavy assets that require massive cash outlays to maintain are terrible vehicles for preserving long term purchasing power. Why are these traditional hard assets seemingly unable to outrun the test of time? Because the aggregate wealth of human society is continuously generated by the most advanced productive forces and the sharpest business minds. As the economy charges forward, the pie of global assets keeps expanding. By holding on to unproductive land, you are essentially opting out of the distribution of new wealth, meaning your purchasing power will inevitably be diluted by those who actually create real value. The same goes for cash, which is a concept we're all too familiar with. Thanks to the relentless creep of inflation, the purchasing power of cash is on a permanent downward trajectory. Decades ago, having $100,000 meant you were set for life. Today, it's barely a down payment on a house in a major city. Even the term millionaire, which used to be the gold standard for ultimate wealth, has lost its luster. Today, the people who actually call the shots are the billionaires. If neither land nor cash can withstand the test of time, what can? The answer lies in the very nature of business: owning equity in the most competitive enterprises within the most dynamic economies. Only these companies can continuously transform society's productivity into real profits. And only by owning a piece of them can you truly preserve and even expand your purchasing power over the long haul. This is the foundational logic of why we invest and why we practice value investing. A common misconception about value investing is that it only works during economic booms or roaring bull markets. In reality, it's quite the opposite. This entire framework was forged during the darkest chapter of modern economic history. Back in the 1920s and 30s, Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, had just entered the market when the Great Depression of 1929 struck. The macroeconomic environment was brutal. Unemployment in the US skyrocketed to 25%, the entire economy shrank by a third, businesses collapsed en masse, and despair was everywhere. Yet, against this catastrophic backdrop, Graham relied on his methodology to deliver exceptional investment returns. We cannot change the macro environment, but what we can do is use Graham's 3 ironclad rules to build our own certainty amid the chaos. First, a stock is not a piece of paper or a blip on a screen to be traded. It represents fractional ownership of a real business. When you buy a stock, you become a micro owner of that enterprise. Second, view the market through the right lens. The market is made up of real, living human beings, and human nature is hardwired for short term speculation and instant gratification. This causes a company's stock price to wildly detach from its intrinsic value, driven by bouts of collective euphoria or sheer panic. For a value investor, this disconnect is the ultimate opportunity. Cheap is the ultimate truth. Or, as we say, buy with a margin of safety. No one can completely understand a company, and no one can flawlessly predict the future. Therefore, when we buy, we must demand a wide margin of safety. When the price is low enough, the risk you assume is small enough. Many people mistake a margin of safety for merely hunting for cheap bargains. In reality, it is an explicit admission of our own cognitive limitations. If a business is worth $100 and you buy it for $90, you are losing money the moment your estimates are off by even a tiny fraction. But if market panic allows you to scoop it up at $30, you will likely still come out ahead, even if the company hits a bump in the road, and even if you miscalculated a few risks. A margin of safety isn't designed to maximize your gains. It's designed to protect you from what you don't know and what you can't predict. If Graham taught us how to play defense by buying cheap, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger took the framework to the next level, seeking out truly outstanding businesses. Over the long term, the return an investor reaps can never outpace the underlying earnings growth of the business itself. If a company has lost its competitive vitality, it will turn out to be a terrible investment no matter how cheaply you bought it. We need assets that can evolve, adapt, and grow stronger alongside the era we live in. To explain how to find these companies, the late Charlie Munger used to share a brilliant fishing story. He and Buffett would travel to Minnesota every year to fish. The state has thousands of lakes, yet every time they went, they came back with an abundance of fish. Someone eventually asked them, "Why don't you guys just fish in the biggest, most spectacular looking lakes? Why drive for hours out of your way just to fish in one specific obscure spot?" Buffett had actually tried fishing in the massive lakes on his own, only to sit there for hours without a single bite. He later realized the secret to their success. They always traveled with a local guide who had lived there his entire life. That guide knew exactly which specific small lake held the highest concentration of fish during that exact season and under those specific weather conditions. From this, Munger distilled two rules. First, go where the fish are. Second, never forget the first rule. In the world of investing, that specific fishing hole is what we call your circle of competence. To be a successful value investor, you don't need to be a walking encyclopedia. You don't need to master every nuance of the macroeconomy or dissect the regulatory policies of every single industry. You just need to act like that local guide. Stay within the two or three industries you understand inside and out, and fish diligently within your circle of competence. That is more than enough. This sounds deceptively simple, but in practice, the hardest part isn't drawing the boundary. It's resisting the temptation to stray outside it. When you are sitting quietly by your familiar little pond and nothing is biting for a few days, while the speculative frenzy in some hyped up sector you don't understand is making overnight millionaires left and right, can you actually sit still? Ultimately, a circle of competence isn't about intelligence, it's about intellectual honesty. Admitting that there is money you are simply not qualified to make is the ultimate armor that keeps you alive in the markets. Let's circle back to where we began. The essence of wealth is your purchasing power in the economy. No matter how the macroeconomic cycles turn, the North Star of value investing remains unchanged. Identifying the most competitive enterprises in the most fertile soil and compounding your wealth alongside their growth. Stay within your circle of competence and always leave a margin of safety for the future. That is the greatest gift that time can bestow upon a rational mind.